Okay, we also have Hanoi. She's the field director from the Chamber of Commerce. And I think she's not a coolie girl? Or not a coolie girl over here, Hanoi. All right? And you know, she's the field director. Wow, that's so young. How about that? Black, not a coolie huh? All right. Okay, without further ado, Congresswoman, please.
Good afternoon and aloha, everyone. It's good to be home. Kanoi is a nahulu, for those of you who are trying to place her. And she has a difficult last name because of Tony, her dad, but her mom is Jan Byrne, but a nahulu family. So thank you all for having us. Kanoi is going to tell you the Chamber's position. I'm going to give you a bit of background. As many of you know, I've been a member of Congress for 4 years, and I was a member on the Armed Services Committee. And one of the things that I have asked since the beginning, since 2011 when I took office there, I've asked the military, in particular the Army, what is your Army going to look like in the year 2020? The reason is, as you all know, we had already said we're drawing down. We're going to draw down from Afghanistan and Iraq, which meant that the, quote, what we call end strength, in other words, the numbers are of course expected to reduce because we went up because of Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's natural that we would see a coming down. Army was always a concern of mine. The reason is, in 2011, as you know, the President made an announcement that we are going to pivot to Asia Pacific. Pivot, believe it or not, is a basketball term, and we all know the President plays basketball. So it was a pivot to Asia Pacific. But the question became, as we pivot to Asia Pacific, what do the branches then do? There is no question, though my colleagues on the Army side get very upset when I say this, Asia Pacific is an air and sea power. If you have any idea, the Pacific Ocean, you know, the problem is when we go to school, so all of you who have things in Waianae High School, Nanakuli, I want you guys to go look at those maps of the world that we grew up with. You know, they cut the Pacific in half. So when they put it on the bulletin board, you're wondering, oh, is Hawaii over here or is Hawaii over there, right? But if they were smart and they put the Pacific in the middle, which is what people like the Marines and the Navy do here, you will see how large that Pacific Ocean is. Those of you who are in the military, you know that they don't speak in English, they speak in acronyms. So what they call the PACOM, the Pacific Command AOR, Area Responsibility, is 55% of the Earth's surface. 55%. It has the 3 greatest economies of the world, Japan, China, the United States, and the 4th, rising, which is India, also in the PACOM AOR. There's 5 of our 7 treaty nations are in that area as well. And we all know the rise of China and the whole issue of how Asia Pacific will define us. So that has always been a concern of mine. In other words, what then happens to the Army? Now, when in 2012, right after Senator Inoue passed, I was on a panel, and Calvert Young, who is Governor Abercrombie's Director of Budget and Finance, he said at that time, you know, I'm not concerned for Hawaii of what we call the fiscal cliff, which is what, you know, we were talking about in Washington. He says, what I'm concerned about for Hawaii is what he called the Inoue cliff. And he was absolutely correct. And let me tell you why. One of the things Senator did in 2012, before he passed, was to create the position of the 4-star Army General. We have a 4-star in Schofield. The reason why is because though the Pacific is an air and sea power, all our allies in the Pacific are ground power. In other words, the Army. So he felt that the way to respect the Army of other nations, which were our allies, we needed no less than a 4-star general here. That is, of course, General Brooks. And that is what we have. But the question still remains, what does the Army look like in the year 2020? You have heard words like the Pacific Pathways. You will also hear other things coming out as to how they are redefining themselves. But know one thing, the Marines are an expeditionary force. That is very much what the Army was kind of moving towards. And we don't need both of them to be doing the same thing. So the Army has now looked upon itself, and you read about this thing called Pacific Pathways, which is their way of addressing the future. Pacific Pathways has a presence in the various countries that are our allies. And what they do is they train. The way they get in is there is nothing, no country does what the United States does in terms of security. But more importantly than that, we are foremost when it comes to what they call HADA, which is humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. So whenever there's a typhoon like Haiyan, Fukushima Daiichi in Japan, the Tohoku earthquake, who's the first there? The United States. Who does the cleanup? The United States. So taking that talent and skill is what Pacific Pathways has the entree in all of these countries. Still, what happened is, as you know, in 2011, we in Congress instituted what is called sequestration. So as a result of sequestration, which really was, it was a law passed by both sides, but it was to address the concerns of the budget and the debt and the deficit that you hear so much about. So what we did was we capped the amount of our spending, and in addition to that, we radicalized and cut the spending. So two things. One is a cap, and the second one is a cut. The sequestration is what brings us to where we are here. So those of you who follow the military, you also know that what happens every 4 years is what they call the QDR. It's a quadrennial defense review, which asks the question, how are we going to fund for the next 4 years? What is it that's going to be important for the military in the next 4 years? This year, 2014, was the year for the QDR. I had high expectations for that QDR for two reasons, and I thought Hawaii would be okay. Because the QDR is done, there's two chairs that they appoint. One is a former general, 4-star general by the name of Abase. And the reason why I had a lot of faith in General Abase is for those of you who remember Carl Eichenberry, who was here doing the whole Makua issues. Carl Eichenberry's roommate at West Point was General Abase. The second person who had it was a former Secretary of Defense under Bill Clinton by the name of William Perry. Carl Eichenberry is at Stanford because of William Perry. So I thought, with those connections, we will be fine in the Pacific. And know that, of course, General Abase is Army, West Point grad, just like Carl Eichenberry. What the QDR did in 2014 was it did not do what I was hoping it would do. We know that we cannot be in two places at the same time. Or as we say, we cannot fight two wars. The United States has always premised its assumption by saying we're going to fight two wars. That's from Bill Clinton's statement. We can't. The budget cuts and everything, we can't do it. But I was hoping that we would have a definite statement that we would have the pivot to Asia Pacific, because this is where it's at. Instead, when they did the QDR, they punted. And they said, the military's position seems to be correct in light of the budget constraints. The QDR isn't supposed to be budget driven. It's supposed to drive the budget. So by taking that position, they didn't prioritize as I thought that they would have. So as a result of that QDR, which said the military's position seems fine, the money doesn't then jive with what we're supposed to do. That is why in 2013, there is called a PEA. It's a programmatic environmental assessment. The EIS process is everywhere, including in the Army. Because of the QDR in 2014, in June of 2014, there was another go-around called the Supplemental Programmatic Environmental Assessment. And the Army was then required to take a position as to what then do they do. That is where the cuts come in. The original cuts had no cuts at what we call the Fort Shafter. It had some cuts at Schofield, but it wasn't as bad. It was half the amount. And so there was a potential of maybe 8,000 lost. That was what the original 2013 survey. But with the QDR coming out the way it did, and in addition to that, the cut in the funding, because we have all of these limitations that we have, this is now the figures that you will see. So Shafter gets cut in half. Schofield gets cut. This is actually one estimate. Another estimate is Schofield gets cut a huge amount. Now you have to understand there's about 25,000 or so in Schofield, and it's going to be cut down to maybe 5. So you have to wonder then how do we function? Schofield alone, to give you an idea, when you take this is, by the way, active duty plus civilian employees. If you take the active duty, quote unquote, Schofield, who lives on base and who lives outside in our community, and you add their family members, you're talking about 50,000 people, just Schofield alone. And then you add Fort Shafter on top of that. That's the impact. So when the chamber comes up, they're going to talk to you about the economic impact, but they just want you to see the people impact. For those of us who have relatives or friends who work for the Army as civilian military employees, know that that's a reduction of down to 600, from 606 here, and 1,000, so and they don't have that many. There's only 606 here, and there's 1,000 some on here, Schofield. We're going to reduce that substantially. The other group that we haven't talked about, which are also affected by this, is National Guard. Because remember, Guard served, which is our people, they're all local guys who serve in the Guard. If Army is cutting, then no, Guard is going to cut more. So that's going to be the tension that's going to impact the people who live in this state. Because some people may say, well, that's just military, you know, maybe we'll pick up more Marines or we'll do something like that. That's not the point. The point is, where it affects the people in Hawaii is when you reduce the numbers like that, it's huge. Put this into perspective. Pearl Harbor. Just the civilian employees at Pearl who work on subs, 5,000. That's how many people, Hawaii people, work on subs, 5,000. That's not the private contractors like BAE and others who fix our surface ship. Subs alone, 5,000. So you can see how when you start to reduce the presence of the people, how it's going to affect. Now Shafter, no, this is just Army. This is just the Army impact. We all know that if you go Shafter, on one side is PACOM, you have Army, you go further down, and then you have the Marines, you have everybody at Shafter. That's PACOM headquarters. So you can imagine what an impact like this would have and the repercussions throughout the whole system. So the issue now that we have is how do we get the people behind? So there's going to have a listening session where, because it's an EIS process, they have to come and they have to hold these hearings to see how people assess the impact. So you're going to hear things and you're going to wonder, of course, you reduce the number, the environmental impacts are going to be positive, right? No people, positive impact. But that's not what we need to focus on. We need to focus on the socioeconomic portions of it as well. Because if we begin to lose the people, not only the military personnel, then affects how many civilian full-time military that we need. Also students have jobs there and others have jobs there. You can see then the total impact that we're going to have. So this is why the chamber is going around, wherever they're invited, to give the assessment. They asked me to cover Waianae because it's home turf, but I get to also come back here, and there's another issue that will probably rise again. The Rotary, I think, has been supportive of, or members of the Rotary have been supportive of, and that is, as the Army redefines itself, know one thing. Army, military has to train. They have to train. So the question becomes, how do they train? So as you watch Guam and the movement from Okinawa to Guam that people hear a lot about, the reason why those numbers are getting small on Guam is because they're not able to train them. You got to get on a ship and they got to go to CNMI, the Commonwealth of Northern Marianas, to train. So these are all going to be issues that are going to come out. But what we're asking the people to recognize and to realize is that we really don't have Senator Inouye anymore, who's able to work his magic on making sure that we have a 4-star general here and so forth. So how do we stop this? I will end by saying, I think that the one way we can stop this is when people realize not only is the economic impact, but the military who's going to make the ultimate decision has got to see the significance of Hawaii in terms of the pivot to Asia Pacific. If they don't see that, or if they get kind of distracted by what's going on in other parts of the world, then we may lose that major bargaining chip. Because right now we are the most forward positioned state. We have all the assets, and we have the presence of every single service. That is how important we are. But we have to continue to fight for them. So now I'll turn it over now to Kanoi to finish off.
Congresswoman, and aloha everybody. My name is Kanoi Jorva Jogu. It's a long Greek name, but I have Hawaiian roots. Namu, that's all you have to remember. I'm coming here on behalf of Keep Hawaii's Heroes. This is our organization. We are affiliated with the Chamber of Commerce and the Military Affairs Council within the Chamber of Commerce. What we are specifically doing, and my position as field director, is to get the community engagement. So there's a lot that Congresswoman Hanabusa talked about as far as the strategic level, the training, and all of these things, and that is all true. We need all of that. On top of that, we also have to show the community support. So what's happening is that we're not the only state that they're looking at proposing cuts. So these cuts that they're proposing, roughly about, at the moment, 20,000 jobs, both military personnel and civilian military here in Hawaii, as Congressman mentioned. In addition to that, as she mentioned, about 30,000 family members will also be affected, totaling up to about 5% of our population, making economic cuts roughing out to about over $1 billion, $1.35 billion. So it's a big, huge cut to our economy and to our community. Obviously, the communities that will be hit the first and the most immediate are places like Wahiawa, Mililani, Kunia, Pearl City, those areas that are very close to Fort Shafter and to Schofield Base, that have families living in those areas, students that attend those schools, and all of that. But as a whole state, we're all going to be economically affected by it. So what we need to do is to show our support, to show that this is an issue that is important to us and that we're not just sitting back and going to let it happen. So this is the point where we have to take action. As the Congressman mentioned, we don't have Senator Inouye to kind of fight on behalf of us anymore. It's our time to stand up now and to make our voices heard and show that this is something that is important to us, important to our community, and that we are going to get involved. So there were different levels of support that have been going on. There were some letters that were sent in by different states and different bases. The bases across the U.S. sent in thousands and thousands of letters. From Hawaii, we had just 30 letters on behalf of this issue. So what we as an organization are trying to do is to do 3 goals. We want to create awareness, we want people to sign our petition, We want people to attend the listening sessions. As you see on this board on how we can help are those things that I've talked about. So creating awareness is kind of what we're doing now. We're taking advantage of all of these groups, organizations, community events that are happening. The holiday season is coming up, so we're taking advantage of all of the holiday parades, craft fairs, and things like that where we can reach out to individuals and speak to them one-on-one. Our organization is only so big, so when we come out to these meetings, we are looking for all of you folks to help us out, to get the word out, to talk to your families, your friends, your community members, and help us create that awareness that this is happening. It's something that we need to get involved in. Second, signing the petition. So we have a petition. I've brought copies with me that all of you folks can sign as well. Also, packets. So what we have done is we've made it easy for everybody to get their family members and their community members involved. We've created packets that have a little bit of information in them. So it has all of our information. It also has a quick fact sheet about everything that I've discussed today, a little bit about what the Congresswoman has touched upon as well. And then, of course, the most important part is our petition. So it's very simple. It looks like this. What we're doing is we're just asking people to simply write down their name, either an email address, home address, and a phone number, just to show that we have their support. We have so far a goal of 40,000 signatures that we are trying to reach by January 20th. It's very doable. We can definitely do it. We picked a number that we are hoping to knock out of the park. We want to definitely exceed 40,000, but our minimum is 40,000 at the moment. We have already about 3,500 signatures just in the past couple weeks that we've started to get this ball rolling. At every meeting that we go to, we do ask that people take a packet like this with them. You know, you go to functions, you have other networks, you have family members over the holiday season while you're all sitting down and thinking what you can be thankful for. You know, maybe this is a good time to bring up with your family members about what's going to happen to Hawaii's future, and get them to sign the petition. And then last, what I would like to talk about is the listening hearings. So this date that we've been talking about is January 27th. It's going to be at the Hale Koa. And the actual listening hearing was originally going to be 2 days long. And they've actually cut it down to just one day, only 2 hours, from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Now, we as an organization are going to be coupling that kind of grassy area across the Hale Koa, creating an all-day event, getting people to come out to show that there is community backing, and we want to be able to show up and say these are thousands and thousands of names of people who couldn't be here today, but show their support. It's not just, you know, our military, our congressional leaders, our government officials that are pushing on behalf of this, but it's a community. We support them. We support our military servicemen. We support the civilians that work for them and how that provides for our economy. All of the other, you know, services that they provide to our schools and programs that we have here. So it's a very important issue. We have lots of other additional information, small cards that have these exact things on them that you can pass out to your friends. If they aren't here today, you can ask and direct them to our website right here. It's keephawaiisheroes.com. We have additional information on the website as well, talking about our organization, talking about how we are aligned with the Military Affairs Council, and all of that background, as well as the petition online. They can go online and sign the petition. So they don't have to be here today. If they live on neighbor islands, they can also sign. It's not something that's just going to affect us here in Oahu. This is a huge cut to our economy. You know, the military families, they come in, provides for a lot of our, you know, our real estate business, our housing, things like that. It's a very broad scope that it's going to affect. And then we just hope that you can all get involved. I'm here to answer questions. I have petitions and all the materials. So I hope that before you leave today, you come and see me. I'll be right over here. And I'd love to get you all set up and answer your questions and give you anything you may need. But thank you very much for coming out, for listening to us, and for supporting the cause. If you have any questions, I'll take them now. Yes.
I think Colleen was mentioning how Guam wasn't, I guess, ideal to move because there was a lack of training facilities. we know that Makua hasn't been useful for training, and therefore Pohakuloa had been opened up, and there's been a lot of, I guess, unintended consequences. Are we really an ideal place for training?
Oahu is a very large area, as you know, and one of the problems that we face is the same problem that Guam is going to face, and that is the cost of mobilizing to get them. So right now the estimates is to mobilize people to go to train in Oahu is about $1 million. So it's a huge amount in order to fund. So one of the things that I'm hoping that will pass, I have it in this year's National Defense Authorization Act, is I'm hoping that the Navy, by the way, you remember the Super Ferry? Super Ferry is owned by the Navy. One is in Okinawa, that area. The other is in Dry Dock in Pennsylvania. So I'm hoping that the Navy will bring the Super Ferry here. And the reason is because they will use it, but the bottom line is it's also a very important safety issue for us. As you watch Puna Lava, right, and what's going on, one of the issues there is how do you transport the people, because the Crater Road will take you 2 hours. So the other idea, and if the Crater Road gets covered, then you would only be able to go all the way around and come the other way. So one issue was if there was a way that they could implement a ferry system. So I'm hoping that one of the things that we'll be able to do is to utilize that. Training is, the way we train now is not the same way that you train or people train way back during World War II, which is when Makua started. The way the military, quote, fights, and not that we want to see them fight, but the way they do things is completely different than what they did before. And that's why I believe that training isn't, we shouldn't think about it the way we have in the past. It's not. They do not go to war the way they used to. Not that we want them to. I'm just saying that training is a very different situation.
Yeah, because Auntie, you would know best about the fires that used to come and threaten Makaka and so forth. That was a big concern, yeah, for our neighborhood.
Because of the way it used to be, and because of the way that they did not have the safety precautions there as they do now. So in order, or if they don't do it anymore, one of the issues is how do you then protect the environment? Makua, I will tell you, is beautiful. I think it's beautiful. Makua, you know, and I tell people, you want to see Makua? Go watch the movie Hawaii. You know, that was Makua. That was where they filmed the movie Hawaii. I remember as a kid watching them go back, that whole caravan van of Julie Andrews and everybody else going down, because that's where they filmed. Makua is absolutely beautiful. I agree. But the question becomes, how do you weigh that? If we do not train, this is going to be a done deal. Because you cannot have a military presence without training. You just can't. It's antithetical. You can't.
I don't understand because
I kind of don't understand the economics of this, because it seems like the reason for the military downsizing is because it's too expensive, that the military has grown too big and it's not necessary to spend so much money on the military, and that's why we're downsizing. So I don't understand why we would fight that. Isn't it more cost effective for us as a nation to be downsizing for the reasons of the taxpayer, the U.S. taxpayer? We're all United States citizens, even if we live here in Hawaii, but economically, it seems like our military is just too expensive. We can't handle it. Our U.S. tax system is taxing ourselves. So it seems more economical to downsize as a nation. And then in Hawaii, that gives us an opportunity then to diversify our economy, which is what we've been wanting to do for many years. And the fact that the Hawaii is ceded lands, or Schofield Barracks, and I believe Fort Shafter is also ceded lands. And with our homeless situation here, we could do better for Hawaii if we could house our people better, we could diversify our economy, we could lower the tax burden on the U.S. citizens everywhere, and we could, you know, maybe even go for world peace. My understanding of the military impact globally, I saw a documentary by Bill Moyers, and he talked about how really the U.S. has not won a war since World War II. And when you look at what's been happening globally, we're not a more peaceful society. We're not a more peaceful...
Excuse me, can we get to our next question? You're just kind of rambling on, and I think we have a time limit in our meetings. Please. Yeah, and there's an answer to that, Congresswoman.
First of all, I understand where you're coming from. We will never have a situation where there'll be no military. That's just not possible, because we're not all the United States of America. You know, there's a look at what's happening now in the Middle East, where you have ISIL, you have all these different kinds of disputes and controversies that are going on. You have North Korea, you have China really becoming a major force. So it's all these different things. You know, you will hear during this upcoming legislative session the whole concept of what they call the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a whole growth of all the major countries trying to move a certain way. But I will tell you, all of those ambassadors from those major countries who are trying to formulate the Trans-Pacific Partnerships will tell you the significance of the United States is our ability to provide security. Because trade, if you look at the Pacific, you will be amazed as to how many ships go and transverse the Pacific. This is where the trade is. So having said that, first of all, the ceded lands that you mentioned, when the United States got, quote, Hawaii as a territory, there was 1.8 million acres of land. What was ceded back to the state of Hawaii was 1.2 million acres of land. 400,000 acres, which Schofield is part of, was retained by the federal government. 208, I think is the exact number, is Department of Hawaiian Homelands. So ceded lands is not the proper designation. Crown lands mean that. But that was part of the quote arrangement when we became a state. The title of those lands have already been ruled upon by the United States Supreme Court in the case of State versus Oregon. They said it was clean title, which the state received from the federal government. I don't agree, but notwithstanding, that's the decision. So it is a policy call. And what is it that the United States will be? My position on it is Hawaii is pivotal. We are a pivotal state. You know, we do have economic diversity, but what we also have to realize is how much of that is tied to the military. We lead one of the energy components. It's the military that does all of the energy. Kaneohe will be 100% self-sustained, Kaneohe Marine Corps, by 2015. The United States Navy will be 50% by the year 2020 because of the level of research that is done. You can see all the startup companies that are done here. Department of Defense is the only entity that gives Native Hawaiians what they call a preferential 8A status in doing bids for contracts, whether it's construction or otherwise. So Hawaii does have a definite benefit. But whether that benefit is sufficient, and when people do the analysis, each person is going to have to make that assessment. There is no question. I think, yes, the military is going to downsize. It's already done. The question is where. And that is why we're here. Because we're saying, where is not Hawaii? Because if we're pivoting to Asia Pacific, Hawaii is too significant a place. Look at all the investments we have here. But more important than that, look at what our people rely upon for their economic base. Like I said, Pearl Harbor, just those who work on subs, 5,000. We multiply that by the number of people.
If I can just add, maybe to help explain the process a little bit better, the downsizing is going to happen no matter what. As the Congressman mentioned, it's based on this campaign, and what we are fighting about is where it's going to happen. So we are competing with other states and other bases at the moment. So there are other states that don't rely so much on the military as we do. The states that can make the best case for the symbiotic relationship that we do have with the military, it is going to be to our benefit to keep our bases open and at its max capacity. Sure. I think there was one more question that someone else had. Let me just check. Sir? Did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question. And the question has been this. You already mentioned that the cost of training and the, areas to do that training. So we're in kind of like a little bind in that area, but I don't think that that would, stop our need or change our need for the military to be here and ready to go. That's the thing that we all need to consider. Ready to go, and who the military going to help or protect? It's going to be you and I. And that's what they give their lives for, and we need to keep them well trained. Thank you.
Over. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, I'd like to make a remark, please, real fast. I'm going to speak as a person and not as a Rotarian. And this is an open forum. Guests are welcome to the Rotary Club and to listen to the guest speakers and so on and so forth. And I'm going to say a few words just about this subject here. Myself as a veteran, Vietnam veteran. Okay, I'm aware of training, as Congresswoman knows, how important, like Albert talks about training. He knows a lot about Makua. He lived there, he grew up there. And as a Vietnam veteran, and a lot of our members here are Vietnam veterans, there was, after every war or conflict, there's a demobilization process. Because you gear up for war, you train, you gear up based on the enemy's threat. Okay? However, as you demobilize, you cut back the forces. And at times, the economic picture really comes into play because wars cost money. Right? And we go through every iteration after every war or conflict, the economy comes up first. And after Vietnam, I was still in the military. And they downsized, demobilized, and also the National Guard was affected too. Then, as the threat increases, we have to gear up again. What costs more money is gearing up, mobilizing your forces, increasing your forces, and so forth, where you could have saved a lot of money by maintaining your force and training towards the threat. You talked about Makua. Back in World War II, the Korean War, that's conventional warfare, what the Congresswoman is talking about. Enemy up front, you in the back. Or you're in the front, they're in the back. Okay, we're talking about strategic warfare right now. The threat, what is a threat? We're talking about combined arms. Look at the PECAF. 2 weeks ago, the Secretary of the Air Force said there will be no downsizing of the Air Force in the Pacific. Why? What the Congresswoman said. We are so located out here in the Pacific, in the PACOM, and I like the word pivotal, because we have to look at the Pacific Command itself, and it's what, 3 million or whatever square miles of water out there. And we are the only force And we are not only defensive force in Hawaii. You know, we did a study before about key asset protection, and that was during the Cold War. And what would happen with the Russian, they had a trawler out there, spy ship. And at any time, more so now with the terrorist threats, key asset protection. If we don't have the military forces here in Hawaii, who is going to defend our islands? Let's think about it. Okay, thank you.